There's something unsettling about walking a room where the energy changes when you speak. It's not just intuition, it's experience. And it can be hard to admitting. Sometimes the people we expect to support us the most are silently rooting for our failure. But here's the truth. Your growth will trigger the insecurity of those who have chosen to stay stagnant. And when it does, jealousy shows up, not in obvious ways, but in whispers, in glances, in passive comments that sting more than insults ever could. Jealousy isn't always loud. Sometimes it wears a smile. Sometimes it sounds like advice. But underneath it, there's a discomfort with your light because it reflects what someone else hasn't dared to reach for. When someone responds to your achievements, your happiness, or your progress with inference, backhanded comments, or subtle sabotage, it's easy to start questioning yourself. You begin to wonder if you're too much, too ambitious, too loud, too visible. You second-guess your worth, your journey, and your right to feel proud of who you've become. But here's a deeper truth that often gets missing. Jealousy isn't about you. It's a projection, a reflection of what someone else feels they lack. When someone is jealous of you, what they're really seeing is their own fear, their own regret, their own perceived inadequacy staring back at them. Jealousy doesn't announce itself politely. It slips in through comparison, masks itself in sarcasm, and dresses up as concern. It might sound like, "Are you sure you can handle that?" Or, "Don't get your hopes up too high." It might look like a friend who never likes your wins, a colleague who always finds a flaw in your work, or a family member who reminds you of your past every time try to step into a new future. But underneath those words and actions is a deeper, unspoken feeling discomfort with your elevation. People who haven't made peace with their journey will struggle to celebrate yours. If someone sees your courage and it reminds them of the risks they didn't take, they might respond not with support, but with criticism. If they see your grow and it highlights their stagnation, they may try to diminish your success. And when they see your light shining brightly, they may attempt to pull the blinds down, not because you're too bright, but because they're not ready to see what they've been hiding from in their own life. When you understand that jealousy is a reflection, not a verdict, you begin to see it differently. Instead of taking it personally, you learn to observe. Instead of shrinking yourself to keep others comfortable, you begin to own your progress without apology. Instead of interpreting someone's lack of support as a signal to stop, you recognize it as evidence that you're stepping outside the lines others have drawn for themselves. The truth is, your growth can be triggering for people who haven't done their own healing. When you rise from a past they knew you, when you break generational patterns, when you speak boldly, live freely, and chase what others have only dared to dream, it confronts them with the reality of their own choices. Some people would rather criticize your change than face the discomfort of their own inaction. So instead of being inspired by your evolution, they get resentful. They gossip, they distance themselves, they turn cold. And it hurts because many times these are the people you hoped would cheer the loudest. But when jealousy shows up, it's not your cue to turn back or quiet down. It's an opportunity to rise even higher in your self-awareness. It's a test of your emotional maturity. Because when someone projects their jealousy onto you, it's rarely about what you're doing wrong, almost always about what you're doing right. You've stepped outside the bounds of comfort. You've disrupted the status quo. You've become evidence that something more is possible. And not everyone wants to see that. Understanding jealousy as a reflection helps you set better boundaries. It allows you to stop trying to earn the approval of people who are uncomfortable with your presence. It empowers you to release the need to explain yourself to those who are committed to misunderstanding you. And most importantly, it reminds you that their light is not a problem to be solved. It's a gift to be shared. The more you expand, the more you will notice who can handle your shine, who cannot. Some people will celebrate you, learn from, and be inspired to grow alongside you. Others will distance themselves, criticize you, or try to clip your wings. Both reactions are data. Both responses tell you about the emotional and mental spaces people are operating from. But neither should dictate your movement. You weren't born to play small. You weren't created to keep others comfortable by minimizing your potential. And when people react to your growth with jealousy, they're telling you something valuable about where they are in their own self-worth journey. They're not actually angry at you. They're frustrated with themselves. But instead of confronting that pain directly, they externalize it, they project it, and you just happen to be the most convenient screen for them to cast their shadows on. What this means for you is simple but powerful. You must stop looking outward for validation when the inner work is being done right. You must stop interpreting resistance as rejection and start seeing it as a recognition of your power. The most dangerous thing about jealousy is not that it exists. It's that we let it affect how we see ourselves. We let it slow us down, water us down, quiet us down. But when we understand it for what it is, someone else's fear of their own unrealized potential, we reclaim our energy, our worth, and our direction. You don't need to change to be more acceptable to those who haven't done their healing. You don't need to apologize for being evidence of what's possible. Your light, your success, your joy, They are not things to hide. They are not things to manage for the comfort of others. They are signals that you've broken through a ceiling many haven't even dared to look at. And every time someone's jealousy tries to convince you that you've done something wrong, remember that it's often their pain asking, why not me? Their projection says more about their internal battle than it does about your external reality. You don't know anyone's smallness. That might sound simple, even obvious, but the truth is many of us walk through lying to become smaller versions of ourselves just to fit into the emotional comfort zones of others. We downplay our wins, dim our light, filter our joy, and apologize for the space we take up. We learn often from a young age that being too much makes others uncomfortable, too loud, too ambitious, too confident, too successful. And in response, we shrink ourselves to keep the peace, to be accepted, to avoid conflict or envy. But this quiet sacrifice of self isn't noble. It's exhausting. It creates a life where you are constantly editing who you are based on what others can tolerate. You begin to measure your words, your dreams, and your progress against someone else's ability to handle them. And slowly, almost imperceptibly, you start building your life around other people's insecurities rather than your own purpose. There's a cost to making yourself small. You stop showing up as your full self. You second-guess your instincts. You question whether your enthusiasm is too much or if your confidence will make people inferior. You begin to manage their emotions instead of honoring your truth. And what happens then? You lose yourself in the process. You become a version of yourself that is palatable but not powerful, present but not alive, accepted but not truly seen. Smallness is a survival strategy, not a life strategy. It's something we adopt when we've been taught that visibility is dangerous, that success comes with isolation, or that joy must be earned only if others approve. But growth doesn't happen in silence. Fulfillment doesn't come from shrinking. And your light will never feel right in a room that demands darkness. When you embrace your full presence, your voice, your dreams, your power, you challenge the environments around you to rise to your frequency. And that's when the resistance shows up. People who are comfortable in their own limit might bristle when you expand. They might try to bring you back to the version of you they're used to. The one who didn't speak too boldly, didn't ask for too much, didn't shine brightly. But that version isn't your responsibility anymore. It's not your job to downplay who you are so others can feel more secure about if they are not. Their discomfort with your growth is not a sign that you need to stop. It's a signal that you've outgrown a space that no longer serves you. And sometimes that space is not just a physical place, but a dynamic, a friendship, a relationship pattern. People will try to make you feel guilty for growing beyond what they can understand. They'll say you've changed, and they won't mean it as a compliment. They'll accuse you of being distant, of thinking you're better, of forgetting where you came from. But none of those things are true. What's true is that you remembered you remembered your worth. You stopped waiting for permission to be yourself fully and unapologetically. And that scares people who are still afraid of their own power. It rattles those who chose to play small and want you to do the same so they don't feel alone in their fear. Your boldness is a mirror. Your confidence reflects back to them the risks they never took, the dreams they let die, the voice they silenced long ago. So they react not out of malice, but out of pain, a pain they haven't learned, process, or name. But that still doesn't make their reaction your burden to carry. Choosing not to be small means taking full ownership of your truth. It means walking into a room and not apologizing for the space you take up. Not just physically, but emotionally, mentally, spiritually. It means speaking your mind even when your voice shakes, because what you have to say matters. And in celebrating more wins without guilt, because you worked for them, you earned them, and joy is meant to be shared, not hidden. When you refuse to be small, you give others permission to expand too. You show them that it's possible to live big, to dream wildly, to love deeply, and to lead courageously. You become an invitation, not to compete, but to rise. But here's the hard truthing: not everyone will accept that invitation. Some will stay behind, clinging to the familiar. Some will try to pull you back. Some will resent the fact that you didn't wait for them to catch up. And it will hurt. You'll grieve people who love the limited version of you, but couldn't embrace the whole, evolving, thriving you. Still, you don't owe anyone a version of yourself that keeps you unfulfilled. You don't owe comfort to people who haven't found the courage to grow. You don't owe familiarity when what you're called to is transformation. Your light is not up for negotiation. Your truth is not a debate. You are not too much. You are enough, and then some. And if others can't handle that, it's not your role to become less. It's your role to stand tall, stay grounded, and continue becoming everything you were always meant to be. Your existence is not a threat unless someone is already at war with themselves. And if your presence causes disruption, maybe that's exactly what was needed for something deeper to change. Not in you, but in them. Silent rooms speak the loudest. You know that feeling, the one where you share something exciting, a personal win, a milestone you've worked so hard for, and the room goes quiet. Not because they're in awe, not because they're processing, but because they don't want to give you the satisfaction of being seen, heard, or celebrated. That silence. It's not neutral. It's charged. It's full of unspoken emotions like resentment and insecurity. And once you start noticing it, you realize how loud that kind of silence truly is. We grow up being told to look for support in the form of applause, encouragement, and compliments. We learn to associate love with affirmation, but no one prepares us for the emotional complexity of silence, especially the silence from people we love, the people we thought would always be in our corner, the people who watched us struggle, who saw us build, who knew how much it cost us to get where we are. And yet, when the moment finally comes to shine, they offer us nothing. No claps, no smiles, just a quiet, heavy pause that speaks volumes. That kind of silence can be confusing, even paralyzing. It makes you question yourself. Did I say too much? Was I being arrogant? Maybe I should have kept it to myself. But let me tell you something deeply important. Asher, your joy should never make you feel guilty. That quiet room isn't your fault. It's a reflection of the emotional bandwidth of the people in it. Sometimes when people are silent in your success, it's because they feel left behind. Your progress highlights their stagnation. Your healing reminds them of the pain they haven't addressed. Your courage reminds them of the fear they haven't conquered. And instead of celebrating you, they retreat inward, unsure how to navigate the discomfort that your growth brings up in them. They don't know how to be happy for you because they haven't figured out how to be happy with themselves. It's not uncommon for people to cheer for you when you're struggling but disappear when you start to thrive. As long as you're relatable, as long as you're accessible, as long as you stay within the lines of their comfort, you're loved. But the moment you exceed those limits, the energy changes. It's not because you've done something wrong. It's because you've changed the balance of a dynamic they've grown comfortable in. Your light now casts shadows in places they've avoided looking. There's a deep vulnerability in sharing good news. We think vulnerability only applies to pain, but sharing joy, excitement, and progress also requires courage because it exposes us to the possibility of rejection. When you announce a win and the response is silence, it can feel like betrayal. And that betrayal stings more when it comes from people who once said they believed in you. What's even harder is when they don't say anything negative at all. They're just quiet. No criticism. No attacks. Just silence. The kind that makes you question your worth. But silence is rarely empty. It's usually filled with everything people are too uncomfortable or afraid to say. And if you listen closely, that silence is saying, I can't be happy for you because I'm not happy with me. It's saying, your success triggers the parts of me I haven't healed. It's saying, I don't know how to clap for you without questioning myself. The silence in the room after you speak your truth, share your growth, or express your dreams can either silence you, or it can wake you up. It can teach you who's really with you and who was only there as long as you stayed small. The people who fall silent at your elevation are showing you something. They're revealing the limits of their support, the edges of their comfort, the boundaries of their love, and that's information you need to carry with you. We're often taught to focus on words, on what people say, but behavior is always more honest than language, and silence is a behavior. It's a response, a choice. When you're surrounded by people who say they love you, but grow quiet in your success, don't overlook that. Don't excuse it away. Don't rationalize it with, they're just going through something. Because while that may be true, it doesn't mean you should ignore the way it makes you feel. There's a certain kind of grief that comes with outgrowing silence, with realizing that some people don't have the emotional maturity to cheer for you because your growth reminds them of everything they haven't faced. That grief is real. It hurts, but it also creates space for new people, for deeper connections, for more honest environments where your light is not just tolerated, but invited. You are allowed to take up space with your joy. You are allowed to talk about your success. You are allowed to be proud of yourself even if the room goes silent. You don't need to shrink to be loved. You don't need to mute your joy to stay connected to people who've decided that only your struggles make you lovable. As painful as it is to walk into a room that goes quiet when you start to shine, it's even more painful to silence yourself just to make that room comfortable again. You don't belong in places that can't handle your truth. And the silence you hear, that's not rejection. That's revelation. That's clarity. That's the room showing you its limits so you can decide if you want to keep returning to it. Not every space deserves your voice. Not every relationship deserves access to your joy. And not every silence is worth trying to break. Some silences are there to remind you that the only validation you truly need is your own. Because when your joy is real, when your wins are hard, when your growth is rooted in healing, then the silence of others should never drown out the sound of your own becoming. Every time you try to elevate, step forward, or do something remarkable, there will be people who don't celebrate it. They won't cheer, won't encourage, won't uplift. Instead, they'll focus on your flaws. They'll remind you of your mistakes. They'll question your intentions, not because they're helping you grow, but because they're uncomfortable with your shine. They've grown used to a version of you that was more manageable, more humble, more uncertain. Now that you've found your voice, your purpose, your fire, they don't know what to do with it. So they turn to criticism disguised as honesty. There is a pattern here. People who are secretly jealous of you won't usually attack you outright. That would be too obvious, too transparent. Instead, they come in subtly. They pick at small things. They say things like, I just want to help, or I'm just being real with you. But pay close attention to what they focus on. Do they ever acknowledge your growth? Do they ever affirm your progress? Or are they constantly pointing out what you haven't done yet, where you still fall short, what you should have done differently? These aren't people giving constructive feedback from a place of love. These are people trying to keep you grounded in doubt. They want you to second guess yourself, to hesitate, to look back over your shoulder and wonder if you're really as good as you thought you were. Because if you doubt yourself, you won't move forward too quickly. You'll stay within reach, within control, within the role they've mentally assigned to you. It's a subtle form of sabotage, not through overt resistance, but through constant redirection of your focus. When you're growing, your attention needs to be on what's working, what's unfolding, what's building. But people who are uncomfortable with your evolution will try to redirect your gaze toward your past, your flaws, your failures. They'll ask, are you sure you're ready? What makes you think you can do that? Don't you remember what happened last time? And suddenly, your mind starts spiraling into self-doubt, not because you don't believe in yourself, but because someone you trusted planted seeds of uncertainty in your garden of progress. This dynamic is emotionally draining. You find yourself performing emotional gymnastics just to stay confident. You keep trying to prove your worth, not to yourself, but to people who've already decided that your worth should come with limits. They've grown comfortable being the strong one, the wise one, the more together one. And now that you're finding your footing, it unsettles the dynamic. So rather than adjusting to your new level, they try to pull you back down to where they felt superior. The worst part is that it can feel deeply personal, because often these people aren't strangers. They're friends, coworkers, even family, people who've been in your life for years, people you trusted with your vulnerable moments. And now when you need them to cheer, they critique. When you need encouragement, they dissect. When you need belief, they analyze every possible risk. But this isn't about you being wrong or unready. It's about them struggling with your readiness. Because if you can do it, start the business, write the book, heal from the trauma, change your life, then what does that say about them? What does that say about all the times they told themselves no, chose fear over faith, or waited for the perfect time that never came? In those moments, you become a mirror, and not everyone is ready to see their own reflection clearly. So instead of celebrating you, they try to dim you. They'll magnify your flaws, hoping it will distract you from your light. They'll zero in on your mistakes, hoping it will keep you from feeling too proud. They'll highlight your imperfections, hoping it will humble you enough to make them feel more secure. But your imperfections are not weaknesses. They're evidence that you're real, that you're growing, that you've dared to try, that you're living, not hiding. And the people who truly care about you will always see your flaws in the context of your full story, not as the only chapter. They'll speak life into your dreams, not fear. They'll offer feedback that builds, not breaks. So when someone constantly points out your flaws, but never your strengths, understand that their intention is not always to help. Sometimes it's to control the narrative. If they can keep you thinking you're not quite there, yet they can delay your rise. If they can keep you focused on your shortcomings, they can keep you from recognizing your potential. And yet, here's the deeper truth. You don't need flawless to be powerful. You don't need perfection to be worthy. You don't need everyone's approval to be ready. Growth is messy. Progress is nonlinear. Confidence is built in the moments you keep moving forward, even when voices around you are whispering doubt. The voices that only highlight your flaws are not your guides. They are distractions. They are tests. They are signs of who cannot hold space for the fullness of your becoming. And your task is not to silence them or convince them. Your task is to know yourself so fully that their narrow view of you no longer has the power to make you question your own vision. Because people who truly see you, the ones rooted in love, not fear, will recognize both your flaws and your strengths, and they'll choose to feed the light in you. They'll remind you of your capacity, your beauty, your brilliance, even in your imperfect process. They'll encourage your next step, not shame your current one. They'll remind you that yes, you're still learning, but look how far you've grown. Look how powerful it is to rise anyway, to show up anyway, to speak up anyway, even with all your human edges intact. You've probably felt it before, that subtle tension in a room when someone starts turning everything into a comparison. You're sharing your win, maybe something you've been working on for months. And before you can even finish, they cut in with, well, I've been doing something similar too, or that's great, but I just accomplished it. Suddenly, what was a moment to celebrate your growth becomes a quiet, invisible competition. You never intended it to be a race. You weren't bragging. You were simply being proud of yourself. But jealousy rarely announces itself as hostility. Often it hides behind the mask of competition. Jealousy doesn't always come in the form of sabotage or open criticism. Sometimes it's masked as motivation. You start noticing that someone mirrors everything you do, not because they're inspired, but because they're threatened. You move forward in your lane, but they feel the need to match you step for step, not out of shared joy, but to prove they're not behind. Your success becomes their measuring stick. Your progress becomes their pressure point. And without realizing it, you're being pulled into a game you never agreed to play. It can start subtly. You mention you're working on your health. Suddenly, they're posting every workout. You share a professional milestone. They talk about how they're about to do the same. You publish a project. They launch theirs immediately after. It's not about shared energy or aligned paths. It's about emotional insecurity masked as ambition. They're not running their race. They're reacting to yours. And over time, that energy becomes draining. What makes this dynamic especially painful is that it often involves people you care about, friends, coworkers, even close connections. These are the ones you wanted to grow alongside, not compete with. But instead of mutual support, you're met with subtle rivalry. Instead of celebrating you, they see you as a threat. And rather than having honest conversations, they respond with comparison, one-upping, or trying to outshine. You start to notice that your wins don't land the same way anymore. There's tension in their reactions. There's an urgency in their tone when they share something after you've shared something. It no longer feels like two people walking their own paths. It feels like someone trying to pace you, match you, or quietly beat you. And even though nothing is said directly, the emotional weight of that dynamic is hard to ignore. The truth is, not everyone knows how to hold space for someone else's success without making it about themselves. And that's not necessarily because they're cruel. It's because they haven't done the inner work. When someone hasn't cultivated a strong sense of self-worth, they will measure their value based on where they stand in relation to others. So your growth feels like their failure. Your progress becomes their personal mirror, showing them the parts they haven't activated within themselves. When people are deeply insecure, your confidence becomes a threat. Not because you're trying to threaten them, but because it highlights the confidence they haven't accessed within. And in response, they turn your joy into a silent competition. They can't celebrate you because in their internal world, your victory is evidence of their lack. It's not logical. It's emotional. And it's driven by fear. Fear of being left behind, forgotten, or deemed less than. That's the emotional root of this quiet competition. People who haven't embraced their own lane will always feel behind in someone else's. They'll always compare timelines, accomplishments, and attention. But success isn't a zero-sum game. Someone else's elevation doesn't decrease your value. There's room for all of us to rise. But until someone truly believes that within themselves, they'll struggle to be happy for anyone else. You don't need to play that game. You don't need to get pulled into that energy. You're not here to pace yourself based on someone else's insecurity. You're here to walk your truth, run your race, follow your vision. And when people start competing with you in spaces where you were just trying to be yourself, that's a sign they haven't yet found peace with who they are. Sometimes the most loving thing you can do for yourself is to recognize when a relationship has shifted from collaboration to comparison. Not to fight it, not to call it out in anger, but to protect your energy and return to your center. You don't need to defend your path. You don't need to prove your worth. And you definitely don't need to match their competitive energy with your own. What you do need is clarity. Clarity that not everyone can walk beside you if your presence constantly stirs their insecurity. Clarity that you are allowed to celebrate without managing someone else's emotional reaction. Clarity that your success does not require you to downplay, shrink, or self-monitor in hopes of keeping others comfortable. There will always be people who see your growth as a challenge to their ego. They will measure everything you do, try to outperform it, or rush to replicate it. And while that may hurt, it's also revealing. It shows you where emotional immaturity still exists. It teaches you who is genuinely rooting for you and who is secretly racing you. Let them race. Let them measure. Let them compete. But you stay grounded. You stay rooted in your why. You keep moving at the pace of purpose, not pressure. You keep choosing alignment over approval. You don't need to prove anything to anyone. Your journey is valid, whether or not anyone claps. Your light matters, whether or not someone else tries to dim or outshine it. And if someone insists on turning your presence into a silent scoreboard, let them play their game alone. You didn't come here to win against others. You came here to win against who you used to be. Jealousy doesn't always explode in obvious ways. Sometimes it sits quietly, disguised as politeness, as passive interest, or even as subtle silence. And often one of the most overlooked, yet deeply telling behaviors of someone who's struggling with jealousy is when they choose to talk about you, not to you. This can happen in small, almost invisible ways. A comment to someone else about your choices, a sarcastic remark behind your back, a subtle jab disguised as a joke that somehow always gets back to you. At first, it may seem harmless, even dismissible. But over time, this pattern reveals something powerful. They don't want understanding or resolution. They want control of the narrative. When someone talks about you instead of to you, they're not seeking clarity. They're seeking a form of emotional safety that allows them to process their feelings without accountability. Talking about someone instead of to them is a defense mechanism, one built on fear, discomfort, and often envy. It's easier to cast doubt on someone's character or choices from a distance than it is to face them with honesty. And for someone who feels jealous, the last thing they want is to sit face to face with the person who is triggering their insecurity. That's because jealousy, especially when unacknowledged, thrives in shadows. It feeds on unspoken comparisons, on perceived imbalances, on internal stories we tell ourselves about why someone else's success must mean something negative about us. It doesn't announce itself boldly. It lurks behind side comments, rolled eyes, and half-hearted compliments delivered when others are around. And when those feelings become too heavy to hold, the jealous person will often try to lighten their emotional load by spreading it through gossip, through judgment, through indirect communication that places them in control of the narrative. They'll start by telling others what they think about you, your motives, your decisions, your wins, not because they know the truth, but because speculation is safer than confrontation. They'll claim you've changed, that you're not as humble, that you've become distant or too confident or too ambitious. All the while they avoid telling these things to your face, because deep down, they know what they're saying wouldn't hold up in a real conversation. They know that to look you in the eye and say these things would require courage, the kind of emotional honesty they haven't practiced. There's a deeper pain in this experience because it often comes from people you trusted, people you let into your story, people you shared your doubts and struggles with. And now, rather than speaking with you, they're speaking eyes about you. They're sharing versions of your journey that you didn't authorize, bending truths to fit their discomfort. And the betrayal doesn't just come from what they say. It comes from the choice to exclude you from the conversation about your own life. And yet, this behavior reveals something profound. When someone chooses to talk about you instead of to you, it tells you everything about where they are in their emotional journey. It shows you that they are not ready for authenticity, that they are not emotionally equipped to hold both their admiration for you and their discomfort with where they are. So instead of choosing honesty, they choose distance. They choose speculation. They choose control. Control becomes a coping mechanism. By talking about you, they get to decide how others see you. They get to paint a picture of you that makes them feel better about where they stand. Maybe they say you got lucky. Maybe they suggest you're fake. Maybe they imply you're not as successful or confident as you appear. But all of it serves one purpose: to restore their own sense of power. It's important to remember that someone else's version of your story, especially one told from a place of insecurity, does not define your truth. People will talk. They'll form opinions. They'll spread their perspective. But none of that changes the work you've done, the growth you've earned, or the integrity you walk with. In fact, the more you grow, the more this will happen. People who feel they're losing access to you may try to claim pieces of you through words. They'll talk about who you were, what you did, and how they knew you back when, as a way of staying connected, not to you, but to the power they once felt in proximity to your older, smaller self. They miss the version of you that didn't challenge their comfort. So rather than getting to know the person you've become, they recreate you in conversations where you can't speak for yourself. You might be tempted to confront it, to set the record straight, to clear your name. But not all conversations are worth entering. Not all opinions deserve a rebuttal. What someone says about you behind your back says far more about their character than your own. And often, trying to correct the narrative only adds fuel to their story. This doesn't mean you tolerate disrespect. It means you choose discernment. You recognize the pattern. You see the insecurity. You understand the pain behind the behavior, and you refuse to let someone else's unhealed jealousy drag you down into a game of whispers and secondhand stories. Because real connection doesn't happen through rumors. It happens through eye contact, through vulnerability, through the willingness to say, hey, this bothered me, or I need to understand where you're coming from. That kind of dialogue requires maturity, and not everyone has reached that space yet, especially someone who's still battling the silent war of envy and comparison inside themselves. So when they talk about you but not to you, let that be the evidence you need. Evidence that you've grown, that your presence challenges more than just the obvious, that your confidence, your progress, your truth, it's powerful enough to stir something in others, even when they don't have the words for it. You didn't ask to be seen as competition. You didn't ask to be the subject of whispers. You're just living, evolving, daring to step into a version of yourself that you're proud of. And sometimes that's more than some people can handle. Not because you're wrong, but because your transformation is proof that staying the same is a choice. And for some, that truth is simply too hard to sit with quietly.